I had been on the bench long enough to know that a courtroom tells the truth about people faster than almost any other place in America. People walk in thinking they can manage the impression. They think the right jacket, the right excuse, the right tone of voice, the right little performance will do the work for them. Some arrive polished and rehearsed, with a story ironed flat and pressed clean. Some come in angry before their case is even called, already offended by the idea that rules should apply to them. Some act like the whole thing is beneath them. Some act like the whole world has been unfair to them, and therefore they owe the world nothing in return. And then every once in a while, someone walks in who doesn't need to say very much at all, because life has already testified for them. That morning was bitter cold, the kind of cold that doesn't scream, doesn't storm, doesn't put on a show. It just slips in under doors, presses against the windows, settles into your joints, and reminds you that winter has no interest in your circumstances. The courtroom was running the way courtrooms run, paper shuffling, a cough in the gallery, a clerk calling names in the same steady rhythm, petty violations, meter issues, small infractions, ordinary machinery, the legal system doing what it does every day. Then the next defendant stepped forward. His name was Arthur Pendleton, 62 years old. No lawyer beside him, no family in the gallery, no friend waiting with a coat draped over an arm and concern written across a face. Nobody. Just one older man standing alone at the podium under bright courtroom lights that have a way of making exhaustion look even more exhausted. I looked at him, and I have to tell you something. When you've sat where I've sat for as many years as I have, you learn how to read a person before they ever open their mouth. Not perfectly, not magically, but well enough. You can tell the difference between somebody who's fallen on hard times and somebody who's made a career out of bad choices and theatrical regret. You can tell when arrogance is hiding behind silence. You can tell when shame is. You can tell when someone is performing hardship, and when hardship has carved itself so deeply into them that performance would take more strength than they have left. Arthur was wearing a coat that had given up long before he had. The cuffs were frayed. The color had once probably been navy blue, but now it was some tired gray blue that looked like it had spent too many months collecting cold and dust in city air. Underneath it were several thin shirts layered one over another, not with any sense of order, but with the desperate practicality of a man dressing not for dignity, but for survival. Put on everything you've got. Button what still buttons. Hope it's enough. But the first thing that really caught my attention was his shoes. They didn't match. A worn sneaker on one foot, a damaged loafer on the other. That will tell you something all by itself. Not because poverty is measured by shoes, it isn't, but because there are moments in life when things begin to come apart so quietly, so steadily, that one day you look down and realize even your shoes are no longer a pair. And no one in the world has been close enough to notice before you had to stand in front of a judge. I looked down at the file. Expired overnight parking meter in a public lot, loitering in a commercial zone, total penalty, $150, plus administrative fees. For some people, $150 is an inconvenience. It's dinner. It's a thoughtless swipe of a credit card. It's a number they grumble about and forget by lunchtime. For the man standing in front of me, it was a wall. "Mr. Pendleton," I said. He looked up slowly. "How are you this morning?" People think that question is small. It isn't. Not in a courtroom, not when you ask it and actually mean it. The answer tells you more than the file ever will. He swallowed hard. His face didn't twist dramatically. He didn't put on a little sob story. He didn't rush to sell me misery as though pain itself were a legal defense. He just stood there, tired in a way you cannot fake. "I'm okay, Your Honor," he said. Then he stopped. And after a pause so slight most people would miss it, he added in a voice that sounded dry enough to crack, "I just haven't had anything to eat in 2 days." There are moments when an entire room changes temperature without the thermostat moving. That was one of them. The prosecutor stopped touching her papers. The court officer lowered his eyes. People in the gallery who had been whispering to each other about their own tickets suddenly forgot themselves. Nobody breathed for a second, because that sentence wasn't strategic. It wasn't manipulative. It wasn't polished for sympathy. It was too plain, too bare, too tired to be anything but true. I've heard every excuse in the book. I've heard people blame dead batteries, Dead grandmothers, broken clocks, confusing signs, heart attacks that conveniently resolved before they reached the parking lot. I've heard nonsense dressed up as explanation. I know what theater sounds like. That wasn't theater. That was a man whose body had simply run out of fuel and whose pride had become too weak to hide it. I look back down at the ticket. $150. To the city, it was a fine. To Arthur Pendleton, it was punishment for being poor in public. That's the part systems never like to admit out loud. Systems like to speak in neutral language. Violation, citation, penalty, municipal code, enforcement. Very tidy words. But tidy words don't change reality. Sometimes what we call enforcement is just bureaucracy with clean hands. Sometimes the law reaches a person long before help ever does. Let's deal with the facts, I said. Where was the car parked? In the municipal lot behind the old bakery on 4th Street, he answered. What kind of car? A Ford Taurus. What year? 1998, I think. You think? Yes, ma'am. And why were you sleeping in it? He hesitated. Not because he was inventing anything, because humiliation always hesitates before it speaks its full name. The heater doesn't work anymore, he said quietly. But the car keeps some of the wind off. I fell asleep. I didn't mean to stay past the meter. Do you live in that car? His eyes dropped. For about 4 months. 4 months. I repeated it in my head because sometimes a number needs to be felt before it can be understood. 4 months is not one hard week. 4 months is not a rough patch you tell yourself will pass. 4 months is a season. 4 months is routine. 4 months is your body adapting to misery because it has no choice. What happened? I worked in a textile plant, he said. Factory closed. I came north looking for work. My back went bad. Nobody wants to hire a man who can't lift, can't bend, can't last a full day on his feet. There it was. Not one disaster, several. That's usually how lives collapse. Not in one cinematic moment. Not with some dramatic explosion. It happens in pieces. A job disappears, health gives out, savings vanish, pride keeps you quiet too long, people stop calling, shame gets louder. Then one day, you're standing in court with mismatched shoes and a ticket for trying to survive. I tapped the file lightly. And the loitering charge. Explain that. His fingers tightened together. I was behind a diner, he said. There's a vent in the alley from the kitchen. It blows out warm air. He stopped again, and I waited. I was standing near it to warm my hands. That sentence hit the room harder than the first one. Not because it was louder, because it wasn't. He had been cited for standing near the exhaust vent of a diner kitchen to steal a little heat from the smell of food he couldn't afford. Imagine that for 1 second. Really imagine it. A 62-year-old man, hungry, cold, worn down, standing near the back of a building because bacon-scented heat blowing through a vent was the closest thing available to warmth and breakfast. And the system's response to that was paperwork. I leaned forward. The officer says you were making customers uncomfortable. Arthur nodded once, not angrily, not even defensively. I guess I was. That answer told me almost everything I needed to know. No argument, no grand speech, no bitterness, just a man who had been treated like an inconvenience for so long that even now he was willing to assume the problem might indeed be his existence. I turned my head slowly toward the prosecutor. Counsel, I said, is the city seriously interested in pursuing $150 from a 62-year-old homeless man who was sleeping in a car with no heat and warming his hands by a diner vent? The young prosecutor looked at me, then at Arthur, then back at the file. She was smart enough to understand that this was one of those moments when the difference between legal correctness and moral blindness sits right out in the open where everyone can see it. No, Your Honor, she said finally, the city moves to dismiss. I nodded. Granted, case dismissed. I took my pen and marked it. Legally, that should have been the end of it, but here is the truth. Dismissal is not redemption. Erasing a fine from a hungry man's record does not put heat in his car, food in his stomach, or hope back into his spine. Too many institutions congratulate themselves for removing one brick after they've already helped build the wall. Arthur turned as if to leave, the way people do when they are used to escaping before good luck changes its mind. Stop, I said. He froze. Don't go anywhere. He looked back at me with that mixture of fear and confusion people get when life has taught them not to trust the pause after good news. I folded my hands. You haven't eaten in 2 days? No, ma'am. When was the last warm meal? A lady at a shelter gave me half a turkey sandwich Tuesday afternoon. I couldn't get a bed. They were full. It was Thursday morning. I looked at the court officer. Do we have cash? Before he answered, I was already opening my own wallet. I'm not interested in sentimental speeches that cost the speaker nothing. If you mean what you say, sometimes you start with your own pocket. I pulled out a $20 bill and handed it over. Take him downstairs and get him a real breakfast. Hot coffee, eggs, toast, something with substance. Arthur stared at the bill like it was evidence from another universe. No, Your Honor, I can't. I cut him off. Don't argue with me. You're not in a position to win. A few people in the gallery let out that tiny half-laugh people make when tension cracks, but emotion is still sitting in the room. Arthur's mouth trembled. I don't know what to say. Then don't say anything yet, I told him. Eat first. People think badly when they're starving. And then something happened that you cannot manufacture. And that is exactly why it matters. A young man in the second row stood up. Grease-stained work uniform. Hands that looked like they actually knew how to fix things instead of just talk about them. He walked to the railing, reached into his wallet, and held out $10. For lunch, too, he said. Then an older woman in the back stood up. She dug through her purse and came forward with a small handful of wrinkled singles. For supper, she said softly. And after that, the room moved. One person, then another, then another. People who had come to court worried about their own fines, their own bills, their own bad month, their own trouble. Ordinary people, not rich people, not public heroes, not saints with polished halos, just regular people who saw someone standing at the edge of absolute defeat and decided not to let him stand there alone. Arthur looked down at the crumpled bills being placed into his hand. He held them to his chest like they might blow away if he loosened his grip. Then his lower lip gave out. A single tear slid down his face, cutting a clean track through the grime on his cheek. That gets me. Not dramatic crying, not collapse, just that one involuntary moment when a person who has been bracing for impact for months suddenly realizes they are not being hit again. Thank you, he whispered, but I wasn't finished. A hot breakfast is mercy. It is not a plan. I looked at the young mechanic. You? I said. What do you do? I own a repair shop on 8th Street, he said. Good. His car is a 1998 Taurus. Heater doesn't work. If it gets to your shop, can you fix it? He looked at Arthur, really looked at him. If it's the blower motor or something simple, I can patch it up, he said. No charge. No charge? He shook his head. Nobody should freeze in their own car. That line moved through the room like a current. Nobody should freeze in their own car. You want to know what decency sounds like? It often sounds like a person with grease on his sleeves saying something so plain and so obvious that it shames every polished excuse society has ever made for looking away. I nodded. Fine. We'll get the car there. But even that wasn't enough. Heat in the car was still heat in a car. Temporary relief is still temporary. I have seen too many people receive just enough assistance to stay miserable 1 week longer. That is not help. That is delay dressed up as kindness. Mr. Pendleton, I said, where are you sleeping tonight? He shook his head. Nowhere. Any family? No. Friends? He swallowed. No. That word sat in the room like a stone. No. No couch, no spare room, no brother, no daughter, no buddy from work, no call to make, no soft landing. People talk all the time about money, and yes, money matters, but isolation is its own kind of poverty. Sometimes the worst part of falling is not the ground. It's looking around and realizing there's nobody left to hear you hit it. I reached for the phone on the bench. Years on the bench teach you a lot, not just law, people, networks, which agencies actually do something, which directors answer calls, which places are all forms and no heart, and which places still remember what a human emergency looks like when it walks in the door. I called a woman I knew who ran transitional housing. This is Judge Judy, I said. I need a real answer, not a brochure. I have a 62-year-old man here, homeless, living in a car, no heat, no food, no nonsense. He needs a bed tonight. I listened. Good. And I need to know whether there's any light-duty work anywhere nearby. He's got a bad back. He's not lazy. He's worn out. There's a difference. I listened again. Then I hung up and looked at Arthur. His eyes were wide, as though hope itself were too dangerous a thing to touch barehanded. There's a room, I said. A real room. Tonight. His shoulders jerked. And there's a hardware store near the facility looking for someone to sit at the front desk, answer phones, greet customers. Not heavy lifting. You show up, you look people in the eye, you behave like an adult, and they'll talk to you. His face changed right there in front of all of us. First disbelief, then fear of believing, then the smallest beginning of something that had clearly not visited him in a long time. "A job?" he said. "They'd hire someone like me?" Now this is the moment that matters, because when a person has been humiliated long enough, they begin to cooperate with their own erasure. They start to believe the world's verdict about them. They stop saying, "I've had bad luck," and start saying, "I am the kind of person bad things happen to." That is a dangerous shift. Once a person internalizes worthlessness, poverty becomes more than circumstance. It becomes identity. So I leaned forward and fixed him with the look I reserve for nonsense. "Someone like you? What does that mean?" He blinked. "I mean, look at me. I am looking at you." He said nothing. "You mean a man with mismatched shoes, an old coat, a bad back, a rough month? 4 rough months? Is that what you mean?" His eyes filled again. I didn't soften, not because I didn't care, because I did. "Listen to me carefully," I said. "You are not disqualified from dignity because your life fell apart. Do you understand me?" He nodded weakly. "No, use your words." "Yes, Your Honor. You are a man who went hungry and didn't steal. You are a man who was cold and didn't break into the diner. You are a man who slept in a broken car and still showed up in court when your case was called. That matters. Character matters, integrity matters, and I am sick to death of a culture that notices a frayed coat faster than it notices a decent soul." Nobody moved. Nobody coughed. Nobody even shifted in the benches, because everybody in that room understood that this was no longer just about Arthur Pendleton. It was about the invisible arithmetic people do every day. Who counts? Who doesn't? Who gets patience? Who gets suspicion? Who is allowed to be struggling without being treated like trash? I kept going. Hard times are a condition. They are not a character reference. Poverty is not moral failure. And if you walk out of this room believing you are less than the next man because life knocked you down harder, then all of this help means nothing. He was crying openly now, but there was something different in it. Less collapse, more release. "I'll do the job," he said. "If they'll have me, I'll do it." "You'd better," I replied, "because this room is not giving you charity. It's giving you a bridge. Your job is to cross it." He nodded. The court officer came forward. I told him to take Arthur downstairs for breakfast, arrange a tow to the mechanic's shop, then get him to the transitional housing facility. Someone else in the room quietly offered to get him a proper pair of shoes. Another person said they had a winter coat at home they could bring by later. That's what happens sometimes when one act of decency gives everybody else permission to remember who they are. Arthur turned to leave. He walked slowly at first, almost as if his body still expected somebody to stop him, to call him back, to tell him there'd been a misunderstanding, that none of this was really for him. But as he made his way down the aisle between the benches, people looked at him differently than they had when he first approached the podium. Not with pity, with respect. The mechanic gave him a nod. The older woman smiled through tears. Even the prosecutor, who had begun the morning ready to move files and process violations, sat quietly blotting at her eyes. Arthur stepped through those heavy courtroom doors carrying a few crumpled bills, a breakfast he hadn't eaten yet, a repaired heater he didn't have yet, a bed waiting for him that night, and the possibility of work in the morning. But the most important thing he carried out of that room was harder to name. He carried out proof that he had not become invisible, and the room he left behind was not the same room anymore. That is what people miss about moments like these. They think the story belongs only to the person who was helped. It doesn't. It belongs to everyone who witnessed what happened to a human being once other human beings decided not to reduce him to a case number. I looked out at the gallery after he left. These people had entered as strangers, each one wrapped up in private worry, a speeding ticket, a parking violation, a registration problem, money concerns, family stress, the 1,000 little private burdens ordinary people bring into public rooms. But for half an hour, one man's hunger had broken through all of it. It had rearranged the moral furniture of that courtroom. So before the clerk called the next matter, I spoke. "Let me say something," I said. Everyone looked up. "This courtroom is not a church. I'm not here to preach. And I have very little patience for cheap moralizing. But if you walk out of here today and learn nothing from what just happened, then you're missing the point." I rested my hands on the bench. The law matters. Rules matter. Order matters. Society does not function if everybody treats every boundary as optional. I believe that. I have built my life around that. But law without judgment is machinery, and judgment without humanity is cruelty in a respectable outfit. I let that sit. What we just saw was not weakness. It was not sentimentality. It was not anybody getting away with something. It was an honest recognition that sometimes the paper in front of you tells only the smallest, flattest, most inadequate part of the story. The prosecutor lowered her eyes. When you reduce people to violations, I continued, you make it very easy to forget that they are people at all. Ticket. Fine. Next case. Efficient. Clean. Detached. But the minute you ask one real question, the whole structure changes. When did you last eat? Where do you sleep? Why were you there? Sometimes justice begins the moment somebody bothers to ask what happened before the infraction. I looked at the gallery. Most of you do not wear a robe. Most of you are never going to sit where I sit. Good. One of me is enough. But every one of you will walk past someone like Arthur sooner or later. Maybe tomorrow, maybe this afternoon. Someone with the wrong clothes, the wrong smell, the wrong posture, the wrong kind of broken showing on the outside. And in that moment, you have a choice. I paused. You can decide that their suffering is an inconvenience to your day. Or you can remember that before anyone becomes what society calls a problem, they are first a person. Nobody moved. You do not need to rescue the whole world. I'm not asking for sainthood. I'm asking for eyesight. I'm asking you not to confuse discomfort with danger, poverty with moral failure, or bad luck with bad character. I'm asking you to stop assuming that everyone who has fallen deserves the floor. There are speeches people clap for because they are polished. This wasn't that kind. This was the kind people absorb quietly because it has found the place in them where they already know it's true. I glanced toward the doors Arthur had gone through. A breakfast does not fix a life, I said. A room for one night is not a complete solution. A repaired car heater is not a cure for poverty. Don't turn hardship into some sweet little movie ending. Life is not that simple. But sometimes a person does not need a miracle. Sometimes they need one interruption in the pattern of being abandoned. That was the lesson. Not that kindness solves everything, but that indifference ruins things faster than most people admit. The clerk called the next case. Court resumed. Another defendant came forward. More files, more questions, more ordinary process. But nothing in that room was exactly ordinary anymore. Not after that. Not after everybody had seen how quickly a person can be restored, at least a little, when others stop stepping over him and start seeing him. Years on the bench taught me many things, but one of the most important is this. The greatest verdict you can sometimes deliver is not guilty, liable, dismissed, or pay within 30 days. Sometimes the greatest verdict is this: you still matter. You have not been erased. Your life is not over because your circumstances are humiliating. You are not the sum of your worst month. You are not less human because the world has become less gentle with you. And if there is anything worth remembering about Arthur Pendleton, it is not merely that his case was dismissed. It is that an entire room full of people was forced for one honest morning to confront the gap between the letter of the law and the duty of decency. That gap is where character lives. That gap is where societies reveal themselves. That gap is where people either become colder, narrower, smaller, or become something better. Arthur came into court wearing mismatched shoes, carrying hunger in his body and shame in his posture. He left with food, shelter, a repaired chance at warmth, the possibility of work, and something more powerful than all of those put together. He left with his dignity handed back to him in public, and that matters because hunger is terrible. Cold is terrible. Loneliness is terrible. But public invisibility can be worse than all of them. To be looked through instead of looked at. To be managed instead of understood. To be cited instead of helped. To become, in the eyes of everybody around you, an irritation rather than a person. That is its own kind of starvation. So no, the story is not really about one ticket. It is not about one courtroom morning. It is not even only about one man. It is about the dangerous ease with which people who are struggling become faceless to the rest of us. And it is about what happens when, just for once, someone refuses to let that happen. That is the kind of moment people carry with them. The mechanic carried it, the woman with the wrinkled dollar bills carried it, the prosecutor carried it, the people in the benches carried it, and whether Arthur ever said it out loud or not, I suspect he carried it too. Maybe not as proof that the world is always kind. It isn't. Maybe not as proof that systems are fair. They aren't. Maybe not even as proof that everything turns out all right in the end, because life is usually more complicated than that. But as proof of something smaller and in some ways more important, that even after months of sleeping in a freezing car, even after hunger, humiliation, and being treated like a nuisance, a man can still stand in a room full of strangers and hear somebody say, in one form or another, I see you, you count, you're not finished yet. And frankly, sometimes that is where a life begins again.